It was always the same when I thought about the Ripper case and the memories it stirred within. When I stared into the looking glass, I saw the same green eyes and crimson lips, both my mother's Indian roots and father's English nobility apparent in my cheekbones. By all outward appearances, I was still a vibrant 17-year-old girl. And yet I'd taken such a devastating blow to my soul. I wondered how I could appear so whole and serene on the outside, when inside I was thrashing with turbulence. Uncle had sensed the shift in me, noticing the careless mistakes I'd started making in his forensic laboratory over the past few days. Carbolic acid I'd forgotten to use when cleansing our blades, specimens I hadn't collected, a jagged tear I'd made in ice-cold flesh, so unlike my normal precision with the bodies lined up on his examination table. He'd said nothing, but I knew he was disappointed. I was supposed to have a heart that hardened in the face of death. Perhaps I wasn't meant for a life of forensic studies after all. Tap, 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 tap. I gritted my teeth while Thomas tapped along to the chugging of the train. How Mrs. Harvey slept through the racket was truly incredible. At least he'd succeeded in drawing me from that deep well of emotions. They were the kind of feelings that were too still and too dark, stagnant and putrid like swamp water, with red-eyed creatures lurking far below. An image well suited to where we were heading. Soon we'd all disembark in Bucharest before travelling the rest of the way by carriage to Bran Castle, home to the Academy of Forensic Medicine and Science, or Institutului Național de Criminalistică și Medicina Legală, as it was called in Romanian. Mrs. Harvey would spend a night or two in Brașov before travelling back to London. Part of me longed to return with her, though I'd never admit it aloud to Thomas. Above our private booth, an opulent chandelier swung in time to the rhythm of the train, its crystals clinking together and adding a new layer of accompaniment to Thomas's staccato taps. Pushing his incessant melody from my thoughts, I watched the world outside blur in puffs of steam and swishing tree limbs. Leafless branches were encased in sparkling white, their reflections shimmering against the polished, near-ebony blue of our luxury train as the front cars curved ahead and carved through the frost-dusted land. I leaned closer, realizing the branches weren't covered in snow, but ice. They caught the first light of day and were practically set ablaze in the bright reddish-orange sunrise. It was so peaceful I could almost forget. Wolves! I stood so abruptly that Thomas jumped in his seat. Mrs. Harvey snored loudly, the sound akin to a snarl. I blinked, and the creatures were gone, replaced by branches swaying as the train chugged onward. What I had thought were glinting fangs were only wintry boughs. I exhaled. I'd been hearing phantom howls all night. Now I was seeing things that weren't there during the daylight hours too. I'm going to stretch for a bit. Thomas raised dark brows, no doubt wondering about, or more likely, knowing him, admiring, my blatant dismissal of propriety, and leaned forward. But before he could offer to accompany me or wake our chaperone, I rushed for the door and slid it open. I need a few moments, alone. Thomas stared a beat too long before responding. Try not to miss me too much, Wadsworth. He sat back, his face falling slightly before his countenance was once again playful. The lightness didn't quite reach his eyes. Though that might be an impossible task, I, for one, miss myself terribly when asleep. What was that, dear? Mrs. Harvey asked, blinking behind her spectacles. I said you ought to try counting sheep. Was I sleeping again? I took advantage of the distraction, shutting the door behind me and grabbing my skirts. I didn't want Thomas reading the expression on my face, the one that I hadn't yet mastered in his presence. I wandered down the narrow corridor, barely taking in the grandiosity as I made my way toward the dining car. I couldn't stay out here unchaperoned for long, but I needed an escape, if only from my own thoughts and worries. Last week, I had seen my cousin Liza walking up the stairs in my home, a sight as normal as anything, except she'd left for the country weeks prior. Days later, something a bit darker occurred. I'd been convinced a cadaver craned its head toward me in Uncle's laboratory, its unblinking gaze full of scorn at the blade in my hand, while its mouth spewed maggots.